2 days ago, I spoke about the road to advocacy, how I started this job without even knowing that I'll get here today. So today I thought I would share in detail the story or the experience that we had with our daughter when she had a bone marrow transplant. So for me, this journey ended with our daughter, not really ending, but our personal experience. The ultimate goal was for us to get a cure for our daughter, and that actually happened 2 years ago. So before I do, I think I did talk to Gertrude yesterday. I love pictures, so I just want to show you. Today I remembered that I'll be able to show how sickle cell disease is, because yesterday, the other day, I think I forgot. So I just want to show sickle cell disease, explain what it is before I actually go in detail. I don't want to forget. So, okay. So I just want to explain what sickle cell disease before I go ahead, because we got impacted without even knowing. I have the sickle cell gene that I lived with for over 30 years until we were told when our daughter was the fourth one that she was actually diagnosed with sickle cell disease. So sickle cell disease affects the red blood cells, and this is what happens. For normal people who don't have this disease, their red blood cells are nice, oval shape, and these are the ones on the left-hand side. They go through the vessels nicely and nothing happens. But if you have sickle cell disease on the right-hand side, this is what happens. The red blood cells actually get deformed after about 20 days. The normal red blood takes about 120 days in the body to replenish. But when you have sickle cell, about 20 days, they get deformed. Then they get stuck in the vessels. And this is what happens. Most of the time, it brings about pain. And most other times, you have anemia, so I'll stop sharing that. So because the red blood cells are broken in the 20 days, so people are anemic, they are fatigued, and you have different complications. You may have infections. Those cells may get stuck in the brain. You can have a stroke. The cells can get stuck in the chest, and you have pneumonia. So for my daughter, that's what happened. Her condition wasn't so much pain. Her condition was mostly to do with her chest. She had pneumonia after pneumonia. That's how she was diagnosed at 14 months. Her first attack was at 7 months. So we didn't know, because when I was sick, the doctors just lost it. I'm in Australia, where this condition is, even up to now, it's considered a rare disease. So when I was pregnant, they did pick up that I had the sickle cell gene, but even though they picked it up, they just lost it. They didn't know what was wrong with me, because I was sick. And they didn't actually tell us that, oh, by the way, your daughter might have the sickle cell gene, at least because obviously I had it, or disease, you can bring her back or anything. So they didn't. So from the time she was 6 months old, she started having these complications or symptoms that we didn't know anything about, until at 7 months old, she started a road to having those pneumonia. The first one, she got cured with antibiotics. Again, at 9 months, she had the same condition. But I would always remind them that I was very sick when I was pregnant with her. I almost died. I was in ICU. Please do a full blood check on her. And they couldn't listen to me. And again, at 9 months, she had the same. 12 months, she had the same, but this time it came coincidentally with the 12 months injection. So the doctors said, no, she just has a reaction to the injection. So she has a high fever, and just give her paracetamol, she'll be fine. But the fever never went for 3 days, and I was working at the time. She was in family daycare. I didn't know what to do. For 3 days. I gave her paracetamol, it wouldn't go. 3 days, I was turned back from the hospital, until I think the third day at night, when I left at the family daycare, the lady said, you know what, Agnes, right now, take your daughter to the hospital, because her fever hasn't gone down. I didn't want to alarm you at work. So I took her to hospital, and this time I didn't know what to do, because I've been turned back from ED for 3 times. I decided to take her to the GP, which was next door to to the emergency hospital after hours. I went about 6 p.m. So when I was sitting there, now I have this child, I've given a paracetamol at home, the fever is not going down. So I'm sitting, I found a queue in the GP. So I just go to the nurse, who was very nice, by the way. Sometimes some nurses are not so nice. I'm a nurse myself, so I'm not, you know. So I went to the nurse and said, look, my daughter has been having this fever for 4 days. I've given her paracetamol. I know I'm supposed to wait for the GP, but you could just please do something before I wait. And then she took my daughter, and she didn't even actually use the thermometer. She just took her and she picked her up and ran to the GP's office, and there was somebody in there, badged the door, and she said, you need to see this child right now. And the GP also took her, she didn't do anything, ran across the road and badged into the ED, the hospital, and said, you need to see this child right now. So now all the doctors are running around in the emergency hospital. I'm all by myself, mind you, this time, because I had a husband who was working away in the mines. So I'm all alone at the hospital. And now the doctors are running up and down. I'm like, what's happening? What's happening? They just told me to calm down. And after a few minutes, they came back. They said, your child is really sick, but we're doing some tests and we'll let you know. After a few while in ED, that's a long while, we were told that we are going to be transferred to the main hospital, because I was in the outer suburbs. So we were transferred to the main hospital in the city. So we went to the city. I told my husband, and my friends met me there. And after a day, I think they stabilized her that day. The following day, they actually now told us that, look, your child is very sick. She has pneumonia and her left lung has collapsed. So we need to hook a drain to remove the pus from the lungs, and that your child has sickle cell disease. I was like, what are you talking about? I knew a bit about sickle cell disease, and this is how God works. When I came to Australia, God connected me with 2 sisters from my country. And these 2 sisters, between them, they had 3 kids with sickle cell disease. So I used to help them, but I didn't know the severity. I would help them at hospital. I would see the kids, we would talk. I didn't know the severity of sickle cell disease. And that time I was a banker from corporate world. I didn't know what it was. So I started Googling what it was. I didn't even know how to spell it. So they tell me that she has sickle cell disease. And then I tell one of the sisters that, look, I'm in this hospital, I'm in this ward. From the name of the ward, she knew that there was something wrong, because apparently that ward was a hematology or oncology ward. And so she came running. She's like, what's happening? I was like, I don't know. That was before they told us. And then the following day, they told us that she had sickle cell disease. Then I said, no, you've got it wrong, because when I was sick, when I was pregnant with her, they told me that I have Still's disease, which is some form of blood disease. So it's going to go away, because I got better when I gave birth. So I don't think she has sickle cell disease. Go and check again. I think she has something else. Then they said that, no, she actually had sickle cell. So that's when our life changed forever. Well, at least for 11 years after we chased that cure. From there on, our lives was just in and out of hospital. Every 2 weeks, pneumonia would come back. And also it came with the spleen, which is a spleen crisis, where the body just takes all the red blood cells and takes it to the spleen. So every time we'd run to ED, she would have a blood transfusion. And every time we'd have to, especially in the winter, because of the pneumonia, would always rush to hospital. The following year, after when the lungs collapsed, we just realized after a few months that her chest started growing. She had this figure like her chest would just grow and she wouldn't run. She would always be breathless. Then the doctor said, no, she's actually growing like a bubble inside the chest. When they closed the chest after draining, it didn't close they closed it too soon. So they left some air in the lungs. And she had what they call in motor seal in medical grounds a year later. So they had to go in and cut part of the lungs because it was just deformed. And so because of that, every winter, every 2 weeks we're in hospital because she has a cold or a cough or pneumonia. And also with the medication for sickle cell disease, there's no pharmacological cure. The only cure is a bone marrow transplant. So we had just to treat the symptoms, treat the pneumonia, treat the colds and all. But one thing that the doctors told us during the time that they did all the tests, they said, look, at one point in the future, you may consider doing a bone marrow transplant for your daughter because your third child is a donor. And we were in Western Australia at the time. So we decided to go to Sydney. And also because I didn't know the hospital system, especially, I just got lost. I decided to want to study nursing in Perth, and which is Western Australia. But we decided to go to Sydney because that was a better hospital or better treatment. And we just needed change. And I went to Sydney and I did nursing, and the talk of the bone marrow transplant started then. But because her lungs were not too good at the time, that was in 2011, they couldn't do the bone marrow transplant because the chemotherapy was going to be aggressive on her lungs. And so during my study one day, and I spoke about this the other day, I was sitting in my living room, I was watching TV, and I saw this doctor talking about a bone marrow transplant in Australia. So I got intrigued. I was like, I've never heard this before. And she was talking about doing a bone marrow transplant on a boy who had another blood disorder called aplastic anemia. And so I quickly got a screenshot of the name on the TV, and I contacted that doctor here in Melbourne. I was in Sydney, and she told me that, next time you're in Melbourne, come and see me. I can do a consult. And we didn't wait. We got a ticket and we came here to Melbourne specifically to see her. She gave us a consult and she said, look, there's light at the end of the tunnel. Your daughter might get a bone marrow transplant, but at the moment, the chemotherapy is very aggressive for her lungs. So, but the good thing is right now they're doing some clinical trials for the chemo that is not so aggressive, where we can do like reduced conditioning, like less chemo. So let's just wait for a few years and see how we go. So we knew that at some point, maybe God willing, she may get that treatment. So after I graduated from my nursing school, we moved to Melbourne, waiting, hoping, praying that one day that clinical trial will be okay and she will have the treatment. And so to cut the story short, after so many years and so many complications, including having to stop other medications because they couldn't work, and the blood, she developed antibodies. So the blood transfusions became scarce. Every blood transfusion risk of having another extra antibody. We accepted to do the bone marrow transplant. It was a very difficult thing for us to agree as a family because we had seen a death in the sickle cell community for one of the people who tried the sickle cell, who tried the transplant and they didn't make it. So we had to ask it took us 1 year to actually agree. We needed to be in a space where we could actually agree wholeheartedly without reservations. And so we asked for prayers. The only thing that we asked for that, we had to wait for a period where we thought if the time was right, God willing. And so when it felt right when people started praying for us, and when we started praying, we dedicated her to prayers. We took her to prayer rooms across Melbourne. There's different prayer rooms, and it just felt right. So after a year, we went through therapy as a family, the kids especially, but herself, she was 10 at the time. The moment she heard that she was going to get a cure, she just said, as long as they don't put needles in me, Mom, I want to do it. But for Mom and Dad and the siblings was hard. But after therapy, we managed. But one funny thing, I'm a very strong Christian. I believe in everything that surrounds me, and every word that comes from someone somehow plays a part of my being. And God speaks to me through people. And sometimes he speaks to me in my dreams. So one day, the day we went to hospital, actually, we were turned back 2 times because the ward wasn't ready. they said, no, go and have lunch. And then again, we came back. No, it's not ready yet. The third time they told us to sit in the room next door to the ward. Said, no, I just wait. They're almost done. When I sat in that room we were playing gospel music with all the family members, I slept for 10 minutes, a good 10 minutes. And when I slept, I saw God telling me that, you see these pink t-shirts here? These are all the t-shirts for the kids who had a bone marrow transplant, and your daughter is right here. Yours is right here. And then I woke up, I told my husband that, you can't believe what I've just, I've had a dream. This is what God is saying. So I was confident at the time that, no, this is the time we need to go, because I was so unsure. And they told us that even if you are unsure on the day, even if you go in before they start the treatment, you can stop them. And that's how unsure I was. So we went in, I'm looking at time. We went in and we decided to dedicate that experience, even up to now in our lives, we dedicate our lives to God. Our ward was a prayer room. Like, we played gospel music every day. We prayed every Sunday through Facebook Live. And the nurses in the whole ward, is an 8-bed ward. The nurses would fight, like, not today, I want to go and see my daughter's name. I want to look after her. Our room became a worship room. Even the doctor we knew from 2013, she would come in and said, Agnes, there's just something in this room. And we just laugh it off. Like, the presence of God was just filled in that room. Our friends were outside the ward. My God, this gives me. Our friends were outside the ward praying for us. The church were praying for us. And everybody expected, the worst. When you're going through a bone marrow transplant, there's phases where they're like, no, next week she'll start having sores in the gut and she'll start vomiting and all. And my daughter went through the bone marrow transplant like anyone had never seen before. The nurses were actually, at one point when she started going out, they're like, no, kids are not allowed in this ward, because she didn't seem to them like a patient, especially if she had a beanie on. She's like, no, she's a patient. She used to eat Doritos, a form of the hardest crisps. I don't know whether you have them in America or in other parts of the world, having these different people here. They are the hardest form of crisps or chips. She ate that throughout the bone marrow transplant, and she was expected to have sores in her gut. Our experience was, for her, the experience where we saw was really good for her. But for me as a mom, I don't think I'll ever go through that experience again. It was the most scary thing that I had to go through. But here's the thing, I'm only human, and I believe in God 1,000%. Like, I held on to, I was like, I could feel him. I could feel God because I held on to him. And I had this thing that I still have on my throat that I didn't want to cry, no matter how scared I was, because of the things that I read and the things that I saw on YouTube. Anything was going to be possible. I remember at one time she was having I think some chips or something, and then she had tomato sauce on her cheek. And one of the things you don't want to see in a bone marrow transplant is bleeding. And I thought she was bleeding from the brain. And I ran and pressed the button, like, code blue, she's bleeding. And the doctors came and they said, everybody came, code blue, like 20 or so, 10 or so. And all they saw was tomato sauce on a cheek. I was so scared. I was in hospital for 40 days. And I slept at the hospital for 37 days because she didn't want Dad to. The only thing that she had was diarrhea. That was the only complication. She never vomited, nothing. She didn't want Dad to clean her. So I had to stay in the hospital for 37 days. Out of those 37 days, I don't know whether I slept for even an hour because I just wanted to see her breathe. And I would go and see her. And I would pray to God that nothing happens. And I would be so scared, but I wouldn't cry. One of the days, the 3 days that I went home, one of the days I was going home and I was just paranoid. Like, I would look at somebody in the streets, that, God, why me and my kids and my family? why not that person? But I couldn't cry. I was just so scared to disappoint God because I was so sure that my daughter was going to get cured. And then from nowhere, my friend, her name is Faith, she called me. And she's like, Agnes, how are you? I'm like, oh, I'm fine. I'm going home today. And then she said, you know what, Agnes, things are going, she's a very strong Christian. She will be fine. We're praying for Mapalo. But you know what? Sometimes if you feel like crying, it's okay to cry. And I was like, God, how did you know, Faith? Because I've been struggling for over 30 so days because I felt I was going to disappoint God. That if I cried, that I didn't believe in him. So, and I cried. Sorry. I cried all the way to home. I cried and telling God that I believe in you. I believe that my daughter is going to get cured, but please don't see this as a form of weakness that I don't believe in you. I'm just human. I've been battling and holding those tears for over 30 days. And I went home, and for the first time in those 30 or so days, and I slept. I came back home. I came back to the hospital, and you know, all this was happening. She was fine. She had 1 or 2 hiccups, but nothing major, nothing major. And, you know, to cut the story short, we were in hospital, the least days of minimum days to be in hospital. She was discharged and rang the bell on day 39. This is including the before the actual transplant. And she was discharged. She had a few hiccups, but nothing major. And my daughter, after living with sickle cell for 10 years, she's now cured. She is making the good form of red blood cells. And let me see if I have one of our photos somewhere. Sorry. That's her. I had to blur her name and photo. So that's her. That was the hospital days. And that was the time that she had the drain, when they are draining the fluid. That was the pump taking out the pus when she was admitted the first time. And that was her. She's a very bubbly child, even up to now. I always ask myself, I've asked her how it felt. Maybe at some point when she's old enough, she'll tell us. She doesn't want to talk about it. So, and I'm sorry to break down. This is the first time that I've ever had to talk about, you know, her experience. And yeah, so, but our fight goes on. And this is why I founded Australian Sickle Cell Advocacy. For me, is to fight for people like my daughter that don't have a light at the end of the tunnel, but you don't have to wait to have those flip of the coin and say, you know, maybe, you know, we're hoping that one day every child and every person living with sickle cell disease, the cure will be as easy as every other condition. So thank you again for making me cry.